The evening sky had started turning into shades of orange and purple as the sun slowly disappeared behind the tall buildings of the city. The streets were quieter than usual, with only a few people walking home from work. Among them was a young woman named Emily. She was 22, graceful in the way she carried herself and known for her kind smile. That evening, she was returning home after meeting a friend at a small cafe near the river. Emily held her small bag tightly against her shoulder and walked carefully along the sidewalk. Her neighborhood was not too far, maybe just 15 minutes away if she walked quickly. Normally, she felt safe on this road. But that night, something felt different. The air was unusually still, and every sound around her, footsteps, car horns, even the rustle of leaves, felt louder than normal. She glanced around once or twice, trying to shake off the nervous feeling in her chest. As she turned a corner, she noticed a police car parked along the side of the street. At first, she felt relief. After all, seeing an officer usually meant safety. But as she came closer, her relief turned into unease. A tall police officer stepped out of the car, and instead of giving her a calm nod or a polite greeting, he stared at her in a way that made her uncomfortable. "Good evening," the officer said, his voice firm. Emily stopped walking, not sure what to say. She politely nodded and replied softly, "Good evening, officer." The officer didn't move aside to let her pass. Instead, he blocked the sidewalk with his presence. "Where are you going at this hour?" he asked, his tone sharper now. Emily felt her heart beat a little faster. She tried to keep her voice steady. "I'm just walking home, sir. My house is close by." But the officer didn't seem satisfied with her answer. He stepped closer, his eyes scanning her face in a way that made her uneasy. He had the kind of authority that could make ordinary people nervous, and Emily could feel the weight of it pressing down on her. The street was nearly empty, with no one close enough to notice what was happening. Emily suddenly realized how alone she was in that moment. She could hear the sound of her own breathing and the quick thump of her heart in her ears. She tried to remind herself to stay calm. This was a police officer, she thought, and surely nothing truly wrong could happen. Still, something about his behavior didn't feel right. "Show me some ID," he demanded suddenly. His tone was strict, almost accusing, as if she had done something wrong. Emily carefully reached into her bag and pulled out her wallet, handing over her ID card. The officer held it in his hand, staring at it for a long time as if he was searching for a reason to hold her there longer. She stood silently, trying to keep her face calm even though her thoughts were racing. The officer asked more questions: where she lived, who she had been with earlier, why she was walking alone. None of his questions seemed necessary, but Emily answered each one respectfully, hoping it would be over soon. Yet the officer didn't give her ID back immediately. He just kept standing there, holding it in his hand as though he enjoyed having control of the situation. Emily shifted her weight nervously from one foot to the other. She wanted to ask for her ID back but didn't want to sound rude or disrespectful. Minutes felt like hours. The streetlights flickered on one by one, casting long shadows across the pavement. Emily glanced down the street, wishing to see another person walking by. Her hands felt slightly cold and she tightened her grip on her bag strap. Inside her, a quiet strength began to grow. She realized that this wasn't just a normal routine check. The officer's behavior was not professional. His way of standing too close, his unnecessary questions, and the way he held onto her ID made her feel unsafe. She tried to keep her voice calm, but there was a firmness in her tone now when she said, "Officer, may I please have my ID back? I really need to get home." The officer looked at her with surprise, as though he wasn't used to people questioning him. He didn't move right away. Instead, he smirked faintly as if enjoying her discomfort. Emily's heart sank, but at the same time, she reminded herself that fear would only make her weaker. She remembered her father's advice. When you feel scared, stand tall, keep your voice steady, and look people in the eye. Courage often makes bullies back away. So, she lifted her chin slightly and looked straight at the officer. She didn't raise her voice, but she spoke with quiet determination. "Please give me my ID. I've done nothing wrong." The officer narrowed his eyes. For a moment, it looked like he might refuse. Emily's body was tense, every muscle ready to run if she had to. The empty street seemed to hold its breath. Finally, he slowly handed her ID back. Emily took it quickly and slipped it back into her wallet, her fingers trembling slightly. She gave a short nod and tried to step forward, but he still didn't move aside fully. He seemed to be enjoying the power he had over her. Emily realized she needed to keep her calm and find a way out of this. The tension in the air was thick, and she could sense that things could get worse if she didn't handle it carefully. She prayed silently in her heart for someone, anyone, to come down the road. The night air grew colder, and the silence around them deepened. She could hear the distant hum of traffic from the main road, but here, on this quieter street, it felt like time had stopped. Emily's courage was the only thing keeping her steady, and though she felt small under the officer's gaze, she knew she couldn't show weakness. Every second felt longer than the last. The officer's shadow stretched across the sidewalk, blocking her way forward. Emily stood still, her eyes scanning the street once more. Somewhere deep inside, she knew help would come soon. Emily stood frozen on the quiet street, clutching her bag as tightly as she could. The officer's heavy boots shifted slightly on the pavement, the sound echoing in her ears. Even though the city was not far away, this small road felt strangely deserted, as if the world had disappeared and left her alone with him. The dim yellow light from the street lamp above made his shadow stretch across the sidewalk, blocking her way forward. Her heart beat faster, and she tried to steady her breathing. She reminded herself that she had done nothing wrong. She was simply walking home after an evening with a friend, but still the officer's behavior and the way he stood so close unsettled her deeply. The officer leaned a little forward, his tone sharp as he asked again where she was heading. His voice was not curious or caring. It carried an edge, like he was looking for a reason to stop her. Emily tried to answer politely once more. "I told you, sir, I live nearby. Just a few minutes away." Her voice shook slightly, but she forced herself to stand tall. The officer tilted his head, studying her closely. For a moment he said nothing. The silence between them felt heavier than words. Emily's fingers brushed the side of her bag nervously. She wished the sound of footsteps would come from behind her, that someone else would appear on the street, but there was nothing. Only the faint hum of traffic in the distance. Then he stepped closer. Emily instinctively stepped back, her shoulders pressing against the cool wall of a nearby building. She felt trapped, the open street suddenly shrinking around her. Her mind raced. She thought of her parents, of her younger brother waiting at home, of her promise to always stay safe. A part of her wanted to run, but her legs felt heavy, frozen to the ground. The officer was towering in front of her, and she knew running might only make things worse. She decided to use her voice, the only power she felt she had left. "Officer," she said firmly, though her voice trembled underneath. "I would like to leave now. Please let me go." The officer frowned, his expression hard to read. For a moment Emily thought he might finally step aside, but instead he seemed amused by her courage. He folded his arms and stood firmly in place, as if testing her patience. Emily could feel the fear rising inside her chest like a wave, but she fought it back. Her father's words echoed in her mind again. "Don't let anyone break your courage. If you stay calm, you will find strength even when you feel small." She held on to those words, repeating them in her heart as she tried to keep her chin lifted. Still, the situation grew heavier with every second. The officer's eyes lingered on her, and she felt unsafe. Every part of her wanted to cry out for help, but she wasn't sure anyone would hear. She whispered a quick prayer under her breath. "Please, God, let someone come." As if the heavens had heard her plea, she suddenly noticed faint headlights approaching in the distance. A car was coming down the road, its lights cutting through the quiet darkness. Her chest tightened with hope. Maybe it was just another civilian passing by. Maybe it wouldn't stop, but still, it was someone. The officer turned his head slightly, noticing the car too. His jaw tightened. He shifted uncomfortably, as though the arrival of another person disturbed the control he thought he had. Emily's heart raced faster now, but this time not only with fear, there was also relief. She didn't know who was inside the approaching vehicle, but she hoped desperately that it would stop. The car slowed down, the sound of its tires pressing against the rough pavement filling the silence. Then, to Emily's astonishment, it pulled over to the curb just a few feet away from them. The officer straightened quickly, his earlier arrogance fading just slightly as he adjusted his uniform. He stood more stiffly, like a child caught misbehaving when his parent entered the room. Emily's eyes widened when she saw the emblem on the car. It wasn't just another patrol car, it was marked differently. The air around them seemed to shift as the door opened. Out stepped a man in uniform, but this man carried himself with calm authority and quiet confidence. His shoulders were broad, his face firm yet fair, and his presence alone was enough to command respect. It took Emily only a moment to realize who it was, the police chief. Her heart leapt inside her chest. The fear that had been gripping her began to loosen. Relief flooded through her like a wave crashing against the shore. She had been praying for someone, anyone, to help, and instead, the highest-ranking officer in the city had arrived. The police chief's sharp eyes moved between the young woman and the officer standing far too close to her. Even without words, he seemed to sense the tension in the air. His expression hardened, and his steps were steady as he walked toward them. Emily finally let out the breath she had been holding, her hands trembling slightly as she gripped her bag. She knew this moment was about to change everything. The police chief's polished shoes clicked softly against the pavement as he walked toward the two figures standing beneath the street lamp. The officer who had been blocking Emily's path stiffened instantly. His earlier boldness seemed to fade as soon as he recognized who was approaching. Emily could almost feel the shift in the air. What had been heavy with fear now trembled with the possibility of justice. Emily gripped her bag tightly, her heart still racing, but this time it wasn't just fear. There was a flicker of hope inside her chest. She had never met the chief before, but his presence carried a weight of authority that was completely different from the officer in front of her. The chief's eyes were sharp and calculating. He was not the kind of man who needed to shout to be respected. His quiet confidence was enough. His gaze moved from the young woman who stood with her back against the wall to the officer who stood too close to her. He noticed every small detail, the nervous look in Emily's eyes, the way the officer's stance was stiff with guilt, and the silence that lingered like smoke after a fire. "What's happening here?" the chief asked, his voice calm but commanding. The officer quickly tried to regain his composure. He straightened his shoulders and saluted. "Sir, routine check," he replied quickly. His voice sounded rehearsed, like a child caught doing something wrong but pretending everything was fine. The chief didn't move his eyes away. He studied Emily carefully. She looked frightened, but there was also strength in the way she stood. She wasn't crying or panicking. She was steady, holding on to her courage. The chief turned his head slightly toward her. "Is that true?" he asked gently. Emily hesitated for just a moment, but then her voice came out clear. "No, sir," she said. "He stopped me, but it didn't feel like a routine check." Her words hung in the air. The officer's jaw tightened. He shifted his weight uncomfortably. The chief's expression hardened, and though his face remained calm, his eyes told a different story. They flashed with anger, not the wild kind, but controlled deep anger at seeing one of his men betray the uniform he wore. "Step back," the chief ordered the officer. His voice was not loud, but it was firm enough to break the silence. The officer obeyed instantly, stepping aside and lowering his eyes. Emily felt the weight of pressure lift slightly from her chest. For the first time that night, she could breathe freely. The chief walked closer to Emily. "Are you all right?" he asked in a softer tone, showing her a side of respect she hadn't felt in the last few minutes. Emily nodded, though her hands still trembled slightly. "Yes, thank you, sir," she whispered. The chief gave her a small, reassuring nod before turning back to the officer. His entire body language changed again, gentle to Emily but steel when addressing the man in uniform. "You said this was a routine check," the chief said slowly, his voice low but heavy with authority. "Routine checks don't involve making a young woman feel unsafe. Routine checks don't involve holding someone's ID for longer than necessary. And routine checks certainly don't involve intimidation." The officer swallowed hard, his face pale under the street lamp. He tried to speak, but the chief raised his hand slightly, silencing him immediately. "I saw enough when I arrived," the chief continued. "You were standing far too close. Your body language was wrong. I don't need you to explain. You've already spoken through your actions." Emily watched the scene unfold in stunned silence. She had never imagined the chief himself would step in so quickly and so firmly. Her fear had turned into relief, and her relief was slowly turning into admiration for this man who clearly valued justice above everything else. The chief then looked back at her and spoke gently once more. "You don't need to be afraid anymore. You're safe now." Those words, simple as they were, brought tears to Emily's eyes. Not tears of fear, but of release. The tension that had been building inside her finally had a place to go. She blinked them back quickly, not wanting to appear weak. But the chief noticed and gave her another reassuring nod. He turned back to the officer. "You've disgraced this uniform tonight, and for that there will be consequences." His voice was calm, but the seriousness in it made Emily's skin tingle. The officer stood stiffly, clearly realizing there was no way to escape accountability now. The chief pulled out his phone and made a quick call. Emily couldn't hear all the words, but she understood enough. He was calling another unit to handle the matter properly. The professionalism in his tone stood in sharp contrast to the officer's earlier behavior. Within minutes, another patrol car arrived. 2 officers stepped out, their expressions serious. The chief gave them instructions in a few clipped sentences, and without hesitation, they moved to take control of the situation. The officer who had harassed Emily looked down in shame as his colleagues led him away. Emily felt her knees weaken slightly. The weight of the night was finally leaving her, but exhaustion was rushing in. The chief noticed and quickly stepped toward her. "Do you need someone to escort you home?" he asked kindly. Emily hesitated, but then nodded. The idea of walking alone again, even for a short distance, made her uneasy. The chief turned to one of the arriving officers and gave a quiet order. "See her home safely. Make sure she feels secure." Emily thanked him softly, her voice trembling with emotion. "I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't come when you did." The chief shook his head slightly. "You were brave," he said. "You stood your ground. Don't forget that." Those words stayed with her as she walked away with the escorting officer. She looked back once, seeing the chief standing tall beneath the streetlight, his face stern as he ensured the guilty officer was taken away. For Emily, the night had begun as a simple walk home, turned into a moment of fear, and ended with an unforgettable reminder. True authority doesn't abuse power. It protects, defends, and restores trust. The chief's sharp eyes followed as his men led the disgraced officer toward the patrol car. The night air was still, but the tension had not fully left the street. Emily stood quietly nearby, her heart finally beginning to calm. Yet even with relief washing over her, she could not shake the memory of the officer's intimidating behavior. The chief walked slowly toward her once more. His presence was steady, like a shield between her and the world. "You're safe now," he repeated, his tone softer this time. Emily nodded, clutching her bag tightly, her fingers still trembling. She wanted to thank him again, but her voice caught in her throat. Instead, she looked down at the ground, trying to gather herself. The chief noticed her silence, but did not press her. He understood that fear left traces even when danger had passed. Behind them, the officer being escorted muttered something under his breath, his face red with anger and shame. The chief turned sharply and gave a single look that silenced him completely. The weight of that look was enough to remind everyone present that respect and discipline were non-negotiable in the force. Emily felt a sense of justice settling over the street. The same man who had once blocked her path was now being forced into accountability. She could hardly believe how quickly the situation had changed. Minutes ago she felt trapped and powerless. Now the same uniform that frightened her was being corrected by its highest leader. The chief pulled out a notepad from his jacket. "Miss," he said firmly but respectfully, "I need to take your statement. Not just for tonight, but to make sure this behavior is never repeated." Emily swallowed hard. The thought of speaking about the moments she had just endured made her nervous, but she also understood the importance. Slowly she nodded. He asked her to explain what happened from the moment the officer stopped her. Emily described how she was walking home, how the officer blocked her path, held her ID without reason, and asked unnecessary questions that made her feel unsafe. She kept her voice steady, though her chest tightened with every word. The chief listened carefully, never interrupting, occasionally writing notes. His face remained serious, but Emily could see the anger in his eyes. Not anger at her, but at the behavior she had suffered. When she finished, he gave a small nod. "You did the right thing by standing your ground, and you're doing the right thing now by telling me this." Emily felt a small wave of pride wash through her chest. For a moment, she realized she wasn't just a victim of a bad encounter. She was someone who had found courage when it mattered most. The chief turned to his men. "File an immediate report. Make sure this is documented in full detail." His voice carried the weight of command, and the officers nodded quickly. As the process continued, Emily noticed a few people had gathered at the end of the street. Curious passers-by had seen the patrol cars and flashing lights. They whispered among themselves, pointing and speculating. Emily felt a little embarrassed by the attention, but the chief placed himself in a way that shielded her from their stares. "You'll be taken home safely tonight," he told her. "And tomorrow, I will personally ensure this case is reviewed. No officer under my command will misuse their badge." His words carried reassurance, and Emily's shoulders relaxed slightly. She realized that sometimes justice wasn't just about punishment. It was also about restoring faith. The officer who had frightened her was placed in the back of the patrol car, his head hanging low. The sight gave Emily a strange mix of emotions, anger, relief, and even sadness. She had once believed all officers represented safety. It hurt to know that even one could misuse that trust. But then, seeing the chief stand so firm reminded her that true justice still existed. The escorting officer approached Emily and asked politely, "Ma'am, are you ready to head home?" Emily glanced at the chief before answering. "Yes, I think so." The chief gave her a final nod of reassurance. "You have my word. You will hear from me tomorrow. Thank you for your courage tonight." As Emily walked toward the patrol car that would drive her home, she looked back one last time. The chief stood tall beneath the streetlight, his figure steady, his eyes watching the scene with the seriousness of a man who carried both responsibility and honor. For Emily, that image would remain etched in her memory, a symbol of strength when she needed it most. The drive home was quiet. Emily leaned her head against the window, watching the city lights pass by. Her thoughts were scattered, replaying the events of the night. Fear had shaken her deeply, but the chief's arrival had reminded her of something important. There were still people who cared about justice. When they arrived at her street, the escorting officer stepped out and walked her to her door. Emily's mother opened it, surprised to see her daughter returning home with a police officer. After a brief explanation, the officer left with a polite nod, leaving Emily safe with her family. Inside, Emily's mother listened as she shared what happened. Her mother's eyes widened with shock but also with gratitude when Emily described how the chief had intervened. "He sounds like a man of honor," her mother said softly, holding Emily's hand. Emily nodded. "He was. Without him, I don't know how the night would have ended." She went to bed that night with a heart still heavy but also strangely hopeful. The memory of fear was fresh, but so was the memory of justice. She knew tomorrow would bring more questions, maybe even more challenges, but for now, she could rest knowing that someone had stood up for her when she needed it most. Far away, in his office, the chief sat behind his desk long after midnight. The report of the incident lay open before him. He read it carefully, his jaw tight with determination. He had sworn to protect the citizens of his city, and tonight he had seen how fragile that trust could be, if even one man in uniform failed. The chief picked up his pen and signed the order to suspend the officer immediately. His thoughts were clear. No uniform, no badge, and no authority was above the duty of protecting people. His city deserved better. Emily deserved better. The next morning, Emily woke to the soft light of dawn filtering through her bedroom window. The events of the previous night came rushing back to her. The fear, the tension, and then the arrival of the police chief. She took a deep breath, feeling the weight of relief and gratitude still settle in her chest. Her parents were downstairs, already awake and preparing breakfast, but she stayed in her room a little longer, trying to process everything. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand. It was a message from the police chief himself. Emily opened it and read the words slowly. "I want to thank you again for your courage last night. The officer has been suspended pending a full investigation. You did the right thing by standing strong. You are safe, and we will make sure this never happens again." Emily felt a mixture of awe and reassurance. Even though she had felt powerless at first, the chief's intervention had turned the night around. His words reminded her that courage, even in small moments, could bring justice and make a real difference. Downstairs, her mother noticed her thoughtful expression. "Are you all right, Emily?" she asked gently. "Yes, Mom," Emily replied. "I feel better now." The chief, he really helped me. He made sure everything was handled correctly. Her mother hugged her tightly. "I'm so proud of you for staying calm and standing up. It takes courage to do what you did." The rest of the day passed slowly. Emily went about her normal routine but found herself thinking often about the events from last night. She realized she had learned something important. Fear can make people feel small, but bravery and standing up for oneself can restore strength. Later that morning, the city police department released a statement about the incident. The chief explained that the officer's behavior was unacceptable and that the department would take immediate steps to prevent such situations in the future. Emily felt a sense of relief and pride knowing that her experience was helping others and sending a clear message. Misuse of authority would not be tolerated. As the day went on, Emily reflected on the power of responsibility and integrity. She thought about the officer who had tried to intimidate her. His actions had caused fear, but they had also revealed the importance of strong leadership. The chief's response showed her that one person in a position of authority could make a significant difference when they chose to do what was right. Emily also noticed the small ways in which the community reacted. People in her neighborhood spoke about the chief's quick action, praising his dedication and fairness. Parents felt reassured knowing that someone would protect their children. Even strangers on the street recognized the importance of standing up for justice. Emily realized that her experience, though frightening, had become a lesson for everyone about courage, accountability, and hope. She thought about the moment when the chief first arrived. She remembered his calm presence, the way he assessed the situation quickly and how he stepped in without hesitation. His actions had restored her sense of safety and confidence. It made her believe that even when people misuse power, there are others willing to correct wrongs and protect those in need. Emily also reflected on her own courage. She realized that staying calm and speaking up had made a difference. Even in fear, she had kept her voice steady and it had mattered. The chief himself had acknowledged her bravery, and that validation gave her a newfound sense of confidence. By evening, Emily decided to take a walk in a nearby park. The air was cool and fresh, and the city felt different now, safer, brighter, filled with possibilities. As she walked, she thought about how fear can isolate people, but courage and integrity can bring them together. She felt connected not just to the chief who had intervened, but to everyone who believed in justice and fairness. The chief's intervention had changed the narrative of her night from one of fear to one of hope. Emily understood that justice is not only about punishment, but also about teaching and protecting. The officer who had misused his authority would now face consequences, and others would learn that they must uphold their duty. Emily's thoughts turned to her family. She wanted them to know how important it was to always stay strong, even in the face of intimidation. She realized that fear can be temporary, but courage can leave a lasting impact. Her mother and father were proud of her, and that pride reinforced her own belief in standing up for herself and others. Later that night, Emily returned home after a short visit to her friend's house. She felt a sense of calm she hadn't felt in a long time. She knew that what had happened could have been frightening and difficult, but it had also taught her valuable lessons about bravery, fairness, and the importance of leaders who care about their people. Emily's experience also reminded her of the value of responsibility in society. People in positions of authority carry immense power, and it is their duty to use it wisely. The police chief had shown her that real leadership involves protecting those who are vulnerable and ensuring that trust is never broken. As she prepared for bed, Emily thought about the night one last time. She remembered the officer's harsh demeanor, the silence of the street, and her own rising fear. But she also remembered the chief's arrival, his calm authority, and the immediate steps he took to restore order and safety. It struck her that in life, moments of fear can often lead to moments of courage and justice. Emily lay down, feeling a mix of exhaustion and peace. The city outside her window was calm now, lights glowing softly. She thought about the lessons she had learned and the people who had made a difference. She understood that sometimes courage is quiet, but it is powerful, and leadership, when guided by fairness and integrity, can turn even the darkest moments into opportunities for hope and safety. By the time she drifted into sleep, Emily felt stronger. She knew that she had faced a difficult moment with courage, that she had been protected by someone who truly understood his duty, and that justice had been served. The events of the night would remain with her, not as a source of fear, but as a reminder of strength, bravery, and the power of standing up for what is right. The chief, back at his office, made sure the incident was recorded properly. and that follow-up actions would be taken to prevent future misuse of authority. Emily had played a vital part in ensuring accountability, and his words of thanks resonated with her deeply. She understood that her bravery and the chief's integrity had created a ripple effect, one that would encourage others to trust in justice and speak up when wronged. In the end, Emily realized that life is full of unexpected challenges, but courage, integrity, and the support of people who care can transform fear into hope. The memory of the night, the arrival of the chief, and the resolution of the situation became a story she would carry with her forever. A story of resilience, trust, and the strength of doing what is right.